Member Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and it is an honour to be able to enter into debate on what is such an important subject when we're talking about the food security and the price of food that Canadians are paying. And I appreciated the amendment that that my friend from Regina had moved, which I had the opportunity to second, and which gave very, very clear instructions to ensure that this concurrence report be not concurred in, to send it back to committee so that we can really get to the root of what the issue here is. And that is the root cause of what is forcing Canadians to pay more. And a question that I asked earlier, Madam Speaker, we had I asked about the entire food supply chain. Because a lot of people, I think, take for granted in our country the fact that we do have a secure food supply chain. We go to the grocery store and there is food on the shelves. We have rules and regulations in place that ensure that Canadians can trust the food that they are buying, that there's an ingredient list on there that you can count on to ensure that there is that trust in the process. That when meat is brought through the supply, there's, again, it's safe. We don't have to worry about disease and the things that throughout human history has been detrimental to the longevity of people. But, Madam Speaker, I asked my colleague a question about the entire food supply chain. Now, I am proud to be the 5th generation that farms in Alberta's special areas, and I'm proud for 5 generations, been proud to help steward that land. And I'll get to that specific discussion here in a moment, but when it comes to where food starts, well, it starts with the farmer. It starts with the rancher, those who grow and raise the food that we eat. And then there's the entire food supply chain that takes place. Madam Speaker, from the farmers and the ranchers that start that process, whether it's a grain operation like my family is proud to be a part of, or whether it's a rancher of which I'm proud to represent so many of those, or whether it's more modern techniques like greenhouses and the like. But then there's a stage of that is what one would call the entire food supply chain. And I'll get to the specific relevance of the carbon tax here in just a moment. But when you have the carbon tax applying at the first stage of the process and costing, when the Liberals increase the carbon tax to the degree that they're planning to, it will cost an average farmer $150,000 a year. Those costs have to go somewhere. But then every step of the food supply chain, Madam Speaker, there are increased costs. So from the farmer, paying increased costs. The truckers who move it from the farm to a storage facility, increased costs. The storage facility, increased costs. Then it goes to I use the example of a loaf of bread. Every step of the process, the transportation of the raw commodities to the baker, or to grind the flour, then from the flour to the baker, and the carbon tax on the ovens. And it sounds like the Liberals now want to have a special tax to tax wood-burning stoves, which is quite something. Talk about ludicrous and ridiculous. But then there's cost to the packaging. There's cost to the supply chain of the packaging which goes into that food. There's costs of the transportation to the grocery store. There's the carbon tax on the cost of heating that grocery store. There's carbon tax on the costs associated with somebody driving to the grocery store to get the groceries. And there's costs at every step of the process, Madam Speaker. That is the consequence of the carbon tax. Rising costs are a feature, not a flaw, of the Liberal carbon plan. So, Madam Speaker, as I wrap up my discussion here, I would just say it's time to stop punishing those who are best equipped to lower food prices. It is time to start celebrating them, rewarding them, making sure that they are well equipped to be the champions of the environment, the champions of lower prices, and that means axing the tax so that Canadian farmers and the entire Canadian food supply chain can bring down the price of food so that Canadians can afford to eat. Let's bring it home for Canadians in a way that ensures that we don't send Canadians to the food bank for the bare necessities, but let's bring prosperity back to this country and lower prices. That's what the Conservative plan will do when we axe the tax and bring home lower prices for everybody.
Comments? The honourable member Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Conservative priorities are to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Now, when it comes to our plan to axe the tax, let's be clear that increasing the cost of transportation is not a bug associated with the carbon tax. It is a design feature of the carbon tax. The purpose of a carbon tax policy is to increase the cost of transporting people and goods, supposedly to deter that transportation. The problem is people still need to eat, people still need to get around, and in the process, they end up paying more without the supposed impacts on emissions. Madam Speaker, this is why Conservatives are proposing to axe the tax, and we oppose the intentional policy of the NDP Liberal coalition to increase prices on the transportation of food, the transportation of people, the transportation of other goods. Could the members speak to the importance and the benefit associated with our proposal to axe the tax?
The honourable member for Ballard River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and that's exactly the important point that it seems like every other political entity in this place forgets. That at every stage of the food supply chain, or when it comes to transportation, whether that's a mom taking her kids to hockey practice, whether that's a school bus that is taking kids to school, whether that is the trains that are carrying the goods from our ports, whether that is the ships that are taking our goods either overseas or bringing in goods from other places. Increased costs is the design of the carbon tax. That is not serving the best interests of Canadians. But what's so unfortunate about this entire conversation is for the last 8+ years that this has been a debate, the Liberals have claimed one thing on the carbon tax, but truly it is meant and designed to punish Canadians at every step of the process, to change their behavior is the way that they describe it. So, Madam Speaker, it's time to axe the tax so that we can bring down the price of everything for Canadians and ultimately empower Canadians to make sure that they are best equipped to make decisions that work for them. It's freedom, and it's time to bring home that freedom, whether it's at the grocery store or every other aspect of Canadian society. It's time to bring it home.
Question and comments. The honourable member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And time again, we hear from the Liberals and the NDP Costly Coalition that, you know what, the government's doing well. They spew some numbers about where they're at according to other EOCD countries when it comes to GDP or debt to GDP. But my question is, and we heard this in Saskatchewan under the Socialist NDP for so long in the 90s, the government's doing well, the government's doing well. So my question to my honourable colleague is, if this Liberal NDP Costly Coalition is doing so well, why are Canadians hurting so much? Why is food bank usage at 2 million people per month? If the government's doing so poorly, why have Canadians never had it so bad?
For Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I think of some quotes of some famous Conservative politicians throughout history. Ronald Reagan, who said that the most terrifying words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Or the late great Prime Minister Winston Churchill of the United Kingdom, who said that socialism is an ideology like trying to pull yourself, or taxation, trying to tax yourself to prosperity is like standing in a bucket and trying to lift yourself up. Madam Speaker, the evidence is clear, and we see it. Evidence today in the heartbreaking stories that myself and I know my Conservative colleagues hear on a daily basis. When the government does well, Canadians are hurting. It's time to make sure that we bring some common sense back to the agenda and objectives of government. Make sure that when it comes to the carbon tax, let's take those billions of dollars out of the hands of bureaucrats and politicians in our nation's capital and make sure that we bring down the price of food so that when a Canadian or a senior, I heard recently a heartbreaking story of seeing a senior at a grocery store who had to put items back because her bill was too expensive. She knew she couldn't afford it. Madam Speaker, when the government's doing well, it means that the people of that country are suffering. It's time to bring home some common sense and remember that the government should be the servant, not the master, but the servants of the people. That's been forgotten in our country. Conservatives will right that ship and ensure that once again the government serves the people of this country.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I guess the question, because I hear from the opposite side that they're always talking about the carbon pricing system, half of it, but I don't hear them ever talking about the rebate that people in their communities are receiving. So the average family of 4 in Alberta would be receiving $386 4 times a year, plus if they're in a rural area, they actually get a rural top-up. So my question is, when they're talking with constituents about carbon pricing, are they also telling constituents and asking constituents about how they feel about the fact that they're not going to be getting that rebate check? That's money right into their accounts, $386, 4 times a year, plus a rural top-up.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And sometimes they just make it way too easy. You have a Liberal member bragging about giving Canadians the money that they took from them back to them. So Madam Speaker, forgive me if I disagree with Liberal logic on this. When Conservatives say we want to axe the tax, we simply want to empower Canadians who are best positioned to make choices when it comes to the food they eat, the vehicles they drive, and not rise costs only to then send it back to a few based on a formula that they certainly didn't consult with the people of Alberta. In fact, very clearly, the majority of provinces in this country actually have elected governments that don't support the carbon tax. That's something that members should maybe not forget when trying to impose that left-leaning ideology that has been so destructive on the people of my province as an example. But Madam Speaker, it is time to bring some common sense back to the conversation. She talks about the so-called rural top-up, 10% more, yet the devastating impacts, the parliamentary budget officer himself made it very, very clear that 60% of Canadians end up paying more in the direct and indirect costs, because every stage of the food supply chain, transportation sector, etc., end up paying the carbon tax. So, Madam Speaker, forgive me when not only was it dishonest when the Liberals claimed that it was a revenue neutral tax, because it's not. Costs hundreds of millions of dollars a year to administer. Then they say that Canadians get more back than they pay into it. That was dishonest as well. And at every step of the process, Madam Speaker, it's time to axe the tax so that we can empower Canadians to make decisions that are best for them. And in this case, Madam Speaker, and the very, very important that they so flippantly suggest is that they're somehow solving the problem by intentionally raising prices, Madam Speaker. No, let's lower the price of food for Canadians so that Canadians can afford to eat, heat their homes, and live the Canadian dream that Prime Minister and those Liberals have taken away from them.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Regina Louvain.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And our Liberal colleague just kind of gave us a glimpse into the Liberal psyche. And she's talking about, well, you never talk about the rebates when it comes to the carbon tax. Well, Madam Speaker, and my colleague from Battle River Crowfoot hit the nail on the head. You don't have to give the money back to Canadians if you don't take it in the first place. You see, time and time again, my colleague mentioned a couple of really great thinkers when it came to the conservative principles. Another one is Margaret Thatcher. And she said the best thing I've ever heard about socialism. The problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. And that's what this Liberal government is starting to do. You can't tax Canadians into oblivion, then wonder why they can't afford food. You've taxed Canadians so much, that's why there's 2 million Canadians lined up to go to the food bank, Madam Speaker. So, could my colleague please, once again, agree with the statement that Liberals wouldn't have to give so much money back to Canadians if they wouldn't take it in the first place?
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot has 1 minute to respond.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate that because my colleague from Regina is absolutely right. And I know he mentioned how under the socialist extremes that Saskatchewan had faced throughout some of its history and how that ideology held that province back. And I know for the 4 years where the accidental NDP ruled over Alberta, there was pain and suffering. Hundreds of thousands of jobs were lost and taxes imposed that certainly the people of Alberta did not vote for. And I know now across this country, Madam Speaker, we are seeing the devastating consequences of a government that thinks that this comes back to the comments I made before. They think that they're the masters, the kings, that they have the right to impose upon the people. Well, Madam Speaker, it's time to reorient the priorities of government. It's time for a Conservative government that will make sure its people are the masters, not the government, and respect Canadians' decisions, respect their hard-earned dollars, axe the tax, and bring home lower prices for everybody.